Top 10 waiver wire stashes ahead of week 15. Yes, week 15, the fantasy playoffs are here. I know that a lot of these names are going to be familiar because we have been doing this all season long. You're not new to this, you're true to this, of course. But what's critical about this week's waiver wire stash video is why we are stashing the players on this list and how you should be prioritizing them. We are looking for upside here. There are no more bye weeks here. It is about stashing guys who can win you your league and why you should trust them on your fantasy roster. As always, you know the drill. Our goal here is to get ahead of the game and get a jump on your league mates. We are predicting which players can be the top waiver wire ads on Tuesday and snagging them now for free so that you don't have to spend your FAAB or waiver wire priority to get them. Let's beat the waiver wire together. And of course, drop any start-sit questions that you have in the comments. Also, at the end of the video, I'm going to give you a full list of waiver wire handcuff priorities. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Let's get spicy right off the bat. I told you that we were looking for upside, and quite frankly, no player on waivers comes with more potential upside than Darren Waller. I'm not joking. I am not exaggerating. As long as Darren Waller is healthy, we absolutely want to roster him. At this point, Waller is less than 40% rostered, yet I have him ranked as a tight end 1. Now, I am a bit more bullish on him, right? Fantasy Pros ECR does have him ranked as tight end 14, but I have to be honest. I am having trouble sitting a guy in a rematch of a game where he literally had 2 touchdowns in the first matchup in week 4. Now, week 13, here at the production, it was modest. It was good for a return here. We talked about it. He had been out for a while, so I'm not shocked that they took more of an ease him in approach. He had 2 receptions on 3 targets for 47 yards. Considering how awful Tua Tagovailoa was and that Waller was limited, that is not bad. I'm okay with that. Expect a ramp up in his usage this week, similar to what we saw earlier in the season when he was hurt. If the ramp up does happen this week and he is successful, good luck getting him off waivers. That is why we want to stash him now. His week 15 matchup against Pittsburgh, it is a very, very generous matchup there, 2 tight ends. And then he plays against Cincinnati in week 16, who is literally the most generous matchup for tight ends. And then they wrap things up at home, at home against Tampa Bay in a game that they should be forced to throw volume. So there should be a lot of opportunity there. Talent has never been the issue with Darren Waller. It is literally just health. The Dolphins desperately need a big upside play opposite of Jalen Waddle. If Waller can stay healthy, literally just for 4 games, he has got league-winning upside. If he is available on waivers, Kayshon Boutte might literally be the perfect stash candidate. Kayshon Boutte has everything that you want in a bench stash. He is not fighting for snaps. He is consistently on the field, upwards of 70% of snaps. He has shown incredible reliability throughout the season, catching 29 of his 38 targets on the season, a very impressive 76% catch rate. That impressive catch rate has not gone unnoticed. It is very noticed by his quarterback, Drake May. May consistently looks for Kayshon Boutte in critical big play situations, despite having just 29 receptions on the year. He has 6 touchdowns. It is easy to overlook those 6 touchdowns when you have a guy like Davante Adams that is out there just casually putting up 14. But 6 touchdowns is tied for the 8th most this year at receiver. And of the receivers that have 6 or more touchdowns, he literally has half of the targets of the majority of those receivers. Kayshon Boutte is a player that you can put into your fantasy lineup during the playoffs and can realistically give you a top 12 performance. That is more than worthy of a stash. And his playoff schedule is okay. Not friendly, not awful, kind of in the middle. Buffalo, Baltimore, fairly average defenses, and then the Jets in championship week, a very friendly matchup. The Cardinals are looking extremely thin this week. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Greg Dortch are out. Greg Dortch, I definitely was going to recommend him as a stash, so this put a big damper on my stash video here. But just FYI, in deeper leagues, it might still be worth it if you have a very, very deep bench here, just in case Marvin Harrison Jr. is shut down for the remainder of the year, because that is their superstar wide receiver. And if Greg Dortch were to come back, he would have extreme value there. So just FYI if you're in a deeper league, but hopefully he'll be active next week and we can talk about it. But moving on here, also Amari DiMercado is out. Trey Benson is still out, and he is still not practicing. At this point, I have truly zero faith that Trey Benson will play again this year. Bam Knight is a must add. We talked about this in a couple of videos last week. I speculated that Benson might have had a setback and that the Cardinals just weren't telling us. Now, to be fair to them, they are not obligated to tell us if he did have a setback, but it would be nice if they would just flat out let us know what could it hurt to divulge that information to us? Clearly, it's not gamesmanship. You are literally eliminated to the playoffs. You probably actually want to lose for the purposes of your draft spot, regardless. Regardless, there is a very strong possibility that Bam Knight is the lead back rest of season for the Cardinals. Now, it is worth noting that Amari DiMercato was limited in practice. He is out this week again, but it's possible that he returns next week. Keep your eye on that. But hedge your bets here on Knight. Knight has had between 13 and 17 fantasy points in each of the past 3 games. He has done very well as the lead back. This week's matchup is not ideal, neither is week 15, but who cares? We don't care about that because Knight is not succeeding on the ground in terms of volume. In fact, he has been quite miserable and ineffective, but that doesn't really matter to us. He is putting up the fantasy points regardless because he gets goal line preference, which turns into touchdowns because our boy Jacoby Brissett always delivers on the goal line opportunities. And Brissett has also been very generous with the checkdowns here. So I feel very comfortable with Knight in my starting lineup rest of season if he is the lead back. We talked about Adonai Mitchell in the waiver wire video as well. I'd actually lean heavily into Mitchell as a playoff stash for the exact reasons that we talked about in the intro. We want to take big, bold chances on players, and there's not a bigger, bolder performance than a 8 reception, 12 targets, 100 yards and a touchdown performance there, looking like a true wide receiver 1 last week. Talent has never been the issue for Mitchell. He has got it. And that is why everyone is reacting so pumped up to this performance, because it's not some random showing up. It's a guy that a ton of people loved and a prospect that people believed in. So it's just confirmation bias here. But here's the thing. While I am not convinced that he will keep repeating this performance, it is rare to grab someone off waivers this late in the season that legitimately has that level of upside. It's uncommon for wide receivers. It's common for running backs, right? Because a handcuff can be on waivers and slide right in and deliver RB1 upside in the right offense very easily. But for a wide receiver, it's a little bit more difficult to do. And we finally got quarterback stability here. I had talked about the reason that I did not trust the Jets was my lack of trust in the quarterback situation. And clearly that was justified because Justin Fields came out and said they were trying to make him Taysom Hill. They were trying to make him Taysom Hill, but Fields refused, and he is out with an injury, so we are safe now. No drama here. So stash Mitchell in case he repeats in a friendly matchup this week. But I'm not done with the Jets. Oh, I am not done with the Jets. Just because Mitchell has one good game does not mean that we are abandoning ship on John Metchie. Atlanta's AJ Terrell was on John Metchie last week, and Metchie had a rough day. Atlanta's defense has been really inconsistent, but when they're on, and AJ Terrell was definitely on, and he held Metchie to 4 receptions on 8 targets for just 19 yards. The rest of season schedule is worth taking a risk on both of these receivers, quite frankly, because at the very least, we've talked about this. We have got a clear 3 games of evidence that the receiving core is literally just Mitchell and Metchie. That is it. We are not even really getting input from Mason Taylor as well. So from a fantasy perspective, they can both work here, even if it's not a massively high-performing offense. Mitchell and Metchie have been playing in tandem for 3 weeks now. In the first game, Mitchell had just 1 reception on 6 targets for 10 yards. Metchie had 3 receptions on 3 targets for 45 yards and a touchdown. In the second game, Mitchell had 2 receptions on 7 targets for 42 yards, while Metchie had 6 receptions, 7 targets, 65 yards, and a touchdown. So while it is great to shoot for the massive upside that Mitchell can provide, Metchie has been solid in 2 out of those 3 games they're operating as the wide receiver 1. The Jets have a decently pass-friendly schedule, and one of those games is against a New England defense that Metchie already had a good performance against. Odunze is set to miss week 14. He did not practice all week, and he was described as week to week with a stress fracture. That is not good. Not practicing with a major foot injury is highly concerning, and the fact that he is already tagged as week to week, especially for a playoff-bound team, they can probably afford to rest him and save him up for the playoffs. I would not be shocked if they take a very conservative approach here. So Luther Burden does have significant upside. Now, I know what you're thinking. Odunze has been a bit of a disaster over the past several weeks. And while he does occasionally have ceiling games, he has not been a truly dominant wide receiver 1, but his absence will absolutely open up opportunities for Luther Burden. And that is critical because Burden has been quietly ascending in the offense. For 4 weeks in a row now, he has played roughly 50% of snaps. That is a massive leap from the first half of the season where he never cracked 30% of snaps. and was usually used a little bit gimmicky and, very specific plays that was clearly Ben Johnson scheming up things, never really a volume situation. But over the past 3 games, he has had a minimum of 5 targets. It's not massive, and it hasn't amounted to much from a fantasy perspective, but removing Rome Odunze and his targets, that is a big deal. Now, the matchup against Green Bay this week, it is very interesting. Green Bay's pass defense has been strong this season, but it's not impossible for a wide receiver to succeed against them. And this week's matchup will give us a very clear idea of what the Bears' rest of season schedule looks like, because they face Green Bay again in week 16, and they face Cleveland in week 15, with their one good clear matchup being San Francisco in championship week. So we'll learn a lot in this matchup here, so pay attention. If you have the ability to stash Luther Burden, I would do so, because if he has a good game, his name alone and being a rookie would likely make him the top waiver wire ad. I did a short video talking about Devin Singletary as a stash through the bye week in case Tyrone Tracy Jr.'s injury was significant. Tracy spoke to the media. He said it's no big deal. He said he's fine. It's just a hip contusion, not a big issue here. I believe you, man. I believe you. So I debated whether or not I should include Singletary in the primary top 10 list and just put him like further back in the list, or if I should have him in the handcuff section. But really and truly, he's not a handcuff. He's more of a reliable back in a very evenly split committee. I know that feels funny to say. I know you don't want to hear it. I know you want Tyrone Tracy to be the far better back, but let's look at it apples to apples, because it's production in terms of fantasy value that we care about here. So let's break it down on a week-to-week basis here. In week 9, the Giants had their first full game without Cam Scatterbo. In week 9, Tyrone Tracy had 5 carries for 18 yards, 3 receptions for 19 yards. Devin Singletary had 8 carries, 43 yards, 2 receptions for 8 yards. Singletary outsnapped Tracy and was the more productive back in terms of fantasy points by a smidge. It was a smidge, but he was more productive. In week 10, Tracy had 14 carries for 71 yards and 1 reception for no yards. Singletary had 8 carries for 20 yards and 3 receptions for 53 yards. Tracy outsnapped Singletary, but Singletary was the more productive back in fantasy. Then week 11, Tracy had 19 carries for 88 yards and 4 receptions for 51 yards. Big day, good day. Singletary had 16 carries for 44 yards and 2 touchdowns. 1 reception, 3 yards. They were equal in snaps, and they were equal in fantasy production. All things equal. Fantastic there. In week 12, Tracy had 20 carries for 62 yards and 3 receptions for 68 yards. Singletary had 14 carries for 47 yards, and Tracy outsnapped Singletary, and he was the more productive back. So, yay, we finally got a win for Tracy. Now, Tracy did get injured in week 13, so the snap count is not a true snap count, although the injury did come late in the game. But Tracy's production took a significant dip here, and everybody was complaining about it online. He had 10 carries for 36 yards and 1 reception for -3 yards, while Singletary had 12 carries for 68 yards and a touchdown and 3 receptions for 34 yards. Yeah, it was a win for Singletary there. So apples to apples here. For the most part, it's been Singletary that's been the one winning there from a fantasy perspective. It doesn't look good on paper when you look at it like an average yards per carry, right? But that makes sense because Singletary is the goal line back. And short yardage back, his yards per carry is naturally going to be lower. So on paper, it won't look good. But in terms of fantasy, it's working out just fine. At the end of the day, it is a committee. It is a committee by design, and that means that it's a committee that we have to look at and say, from a fantasy perspective, which one is more effective for us, for our purposes there. Tracy does not get touchdowns. Singletary is absolutely worth a roster, particularly when we are looking at a schedule of Washington, Minnesota, and Las Vegas. Again, no negative to Tracy, but Singletary is kind of on equal grounds here. All I saw when I read off that list of playoff games there is a list of goal line opportunities. Jayden Higgins as a stash is very simple, doesn't require a ton of explanation here. While he has not shown the upside of an Adonai Mitchell and he does not have the target share of a Metchie, Higgins has been extremely reliable in the back half of the season here. He has had, in the past 6 games, he has had between 9 and 15 fantasy points in full PPR in all but 1 game. That was a game against Denver, and he's had 3 touchdowns over that time period. This past week was critical because we got CJ Stroud back, and I was a bit worried about how CJ Stroud would distribute targets because his secondary target was primarily Xavier Hutchinson, and Higgins' surge came with Davis Mills. Higgins proved that he is quarterback proof in that he is going to be the wide receiver 2 no matter who's at quarterback there. Now, ultimately, he cannot be the wide receiver 1. And that's no fun, right? Because we're looking for super upside here. But Higgins can maintain a stronghold on being the second look here, and we could see an uptick in pass volume for CJ Stroud as we close out the season here and they're making that playoff push. Higgins absolutely will have value and apparently a very solid floor here. So while he's not going to give you league-winning upside of some of the guys that we talked about, he is absolutely a guy that you could plug into your flex spot and feel very comfortable with him in deeper leagues. Now, Devaughn Vele is definitely more of a long shot stash, but with New Orleans' schedule here, it can work. Tampa Bay is another pass-friendly matchup, so he could have another strong week here. Then after that, he has got Carolina. Carolina, tough secondary, but it's a tough secondary that could focus on Chris Olave and maybe open up things for Devaughn Vele. Then he has got a very pass-friendly matchup against the Jets defense, followed up by an even more friendlier matchup against Tennessee's defense in championship week. We talk about rookies having late surges, and while Vele is not a rookie, he is still very young and he is in his second year, so the concept still applies. He had a promising rookie season, but as we can see, Denver shipped him off because they were just extremely deep at wide receiver, and New Orleans was definitely extremely shallow at wide receiver, particularly in wide receiver of substantial size, hence why Juwan Johnson finally became a consistent, relevant target after multiple years of not being able to pull together the total package there. It took Vele a second to find his footing in New Orleans, but the Rashid Shaheed trade really opened things up for him. And in week 13, in a good matchup against Miami, he caught all 8 of his targets for 93 yards and a touchdown. He also had 8 targets the week before. So that's consistency that we need to pay attention to. If Tyler Shuck can be mildly competent, there is enough volume to go around here, and Vele could have relevancy in deeper leagues. And let's wrap things off with a defensive stash. Last week, I told you to stash Tampa Bay for their playoff run. Obviously, they were a very popular ad. They are not super available now. So looking at a defense readily available on waivers for the fantasy playoffs, you can turn to New Orleans. New Orleans gets a bad rap, but their defense is overall very average. I don't know if that's really a compliment there, but it is. Average is fine when you have got a playoff schedule of Carolina, the Jets, and Tennessee. Obviously, Carolina can pull themselves together when they need to. Clearly last week. Hello, Bryce Young. But we already have a reference point on this matchup. The Saints played Carolina recently in week 10. They had a top 10 performance generating multiple turnovers. The Jets can produce decent. Again, we've talked about liking the receivers there, but they aren't a team that is going to light you up. So I would expect around 10 fantasy points for the New Orleans defense in this matchup. And then Tennessee can be very friendly, turnover friendly, and really struggles to produce. So that is a great championship week matchup. And finally, handcuffs. Yay, I told you I was giving you handcuffs. I will not talk endlessly because we could do a deep dive on every single player, but that would be way too long here. So I'm just giving you a list to prioritize here. Keep a couple of handcuff stash. The key here is to grab guys who would go into sole lead back roles without competition if their lead back was to go down with an injury and they're in good or good enough offensive situations. It is literally just stashing them on your bench, guys with high upside opportunities, a little bit of gamble if a lead back goes down and can provide league winning upside for you. Raise your hand if you have ever been the favorite in a championship game and your opponent just so happens to roster a backup running back who then becomes the starter in championship week, and that player absolutely goes off and you lost because of it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you are following me across all social media platforms if you want to, actually. If you feel like it. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Tara Time. So make sure that you are locked in, subscribe, turn on notifications, all that good stuff. We are closing out the fantasy season strong here, and we're heading into the off season very strong as well. It's going to be a fun off season. Trust me on that one. So make sure that you are tuned in. Again, I have live Q&A every Wednesday at 8 p.m. EST, where you can ask me any questions that you got and so much more.